Before I ever said, I do, I thought I was gaining a family. Instead, I walked straight into a battlefield of class and ego. Paul and I first met at work. Different departments, same terrible break room coffee. We bonded over spreadsheets, sarcastic emails, and eventually love. He was steady, thoughtful, and shockingly good at cooking. After a year, we moved in together. Everything was split: bills, groceries, chores. At the time, it felt like perfect balance. What I didn't expect was his family treating me like a parasite. At first, it wasn't obvious. We lived far enough away that visits were rare. Paul had warned me that his parents, especially his mother, were a little much. I brushed it off. How bad could it be? Maybe some meddling, a backhanded comment here or there. I was wrong. The first real glimpse came one random Wednesday a year into marriage. Out of nowhere, Everly, his mom, called Paul to announce she and Tiffany, his sister, were dropping by.
No asking.
Just showing up. Paul was still at work. I'd just gotten home, changed into sweatpants, halfway through prepping dinner, when the buzzer rang that I opened the door. There they were, shopping bags in hand, smiles sharp enough to cut. Everly breezed in without waiting. Still here, she scoffed, eyeing the apartment. I thought you'd have upgraded by now. Tiffany wrinkled her nose. Smells like beans and rice. Are you seriously meal prepping again? I tried to stay calm. We usually cook Sundays for the week. Everly strolled into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and gasped like she'd found a crime scene. Not even wine? Not even cheese? Jasmine, darling, Paul didn't grow up on microwave lasagna. I froze. No subtlety, just straight insults. They camped on the couch, flipping through a design catalog, laughing about my throw pillows like they were on trial. Tiffany even snapped a photo. By the time Paul got home, I was humiliated and silent. He stopped in the doorway, confused. What's happening? We just came to check in, Everly purred. Maybe inspire Jasmine to raise her standards. Paul's jaw tightened. Don't come uninvited again. Everly smiled like it was a joke. We're family. We don't need invitations. But they did it again. And again. Always between 5 and 8, when Paul wasn't home. They'd waltz in, treat the apartment like a cheap Airbnb, and critique everything. Everly mocked the curtains. Tiffany ridiculed my cooking. Once, they dumped a bag of designer hand-me-downs, suggesting I elevate my image. I told Paul every time. He scolded them every time. They didn't care. It escalated. I'd spot Everly's luxury SUV lurking outside our building. Once, Tiffany rolled down the window, smirking. You're like a shadow clinging to Paul's leg. It's actually sad. I started hiding in cafes until Paul got off work, sipping cold tea for hours just to avoid them. But the worst was yet to come. They let themselves in again. I was still in my work clothes, bent over the stove. Everly slid onto a stool, smiling like a cat with a mouse. I hope you're planning to give Paul a child soon. Don't waste your only value. Tiffany chimed in. Yeah, if you can't be a real wife, at least stay quiet. Some women marry up. You? You're just rented furniture. I stood frozen. Then Tiffany leaned forward, her tone dropping like poison. And if you even think about touching Paul's savings, we'll erase you. Socially, legally, financially. Don't test us. 5 minutes later, they were gone. I don't even remember turning off the stove. I just stood there staring at the wall. Paul came home around 9. I didn't tell him everything that night. I didn't have the strength. But the next day I did. He was furious. He called his mother, then his father. Nigel listened quietly, then said, Well, Jasmine isn't what we pictured for Paul. She's an anomaly, a poor wife in our family. That was it. That was all he had to say. After Paul hung up, I sat in the living room, gazing out the window at the fading evening sky.
No tears. No yelling.
Just stillness. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Simon. Heard they're treating you like garbage. You okay? Me? They think we're nothing, Simon replied. Then maybe it's time we remind them who we are. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I stood, walked over to my laptop, and opened a blank document. At the top I typed, Family visit next weekend. I leaned back, the keys still warm beneath my fingers, and exhaled. The following week, Paul hesitated. You really want to go through with this? He asked as I shut my laptop that I didn't look up. They wanted to make it about status. Fine. Let's give them what they want. We didn't announce our visit. That was deliberate. Everly and Tiffany had never given me that courtesy. Saturday morning, Simon called. We're ready. The car's outside. I glanced out the window and froze. A Bentley. Not rented. Loaned to Simon by his father-in-law as a goodwill favor. Polished black with silver trim, gleaming like a spaceship had landed on our street. I stepped into it wearing a simple cream dress and nude heels. My mother wore her hair in a sleek updo, carrying a clutch borrowed from Simon's wife, who always looked like she belonged on a runway. My father wore his sharpest suit, a navy pinstripe with a discreet monogram, the kind that commanded respect in boardrooms. We weren't dressing to impress. We were dressing for battle. The closer we got to Everly and Nigel's neighborhood, the quieter the car became. When we turned into their cul-de-sac, I spotted Everly and Tiffany on the porch, wine glasses in hand, basking in the spring sun. The moment they saw the Bentley, they froze. Everly blinked, stunned. Tiffany squinted, hand raised against the glare. Her mouth slightly open. We pulled into the driveway. Paul stepped out first. Everly hurried down the steps. Paul, what is this? Did you buy this car? Tiffany circled it in awe, her heels tapping against the pavement. Oh my God. Is this the new Continental GT? Paul, this is insane. Everly gasped. Paul smiled calmly. It's not mine. Everly tilted her head. What do you mean? It's Jasmine's father's car, he said casually. Silenced. Everly's expression crumbled like a cake collapsing in the oven. Then the doors opened. My father stepped out of the back, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. My mother followed, elegant in muted navy, and Simon emerged from the passenger seat, tall, broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable, his suit a mirror of my father's. Tiffany actually gasped. Simon offered a cool smile. Good to see you again. Everly stood frozen. Tiffany blinked, as though the air had been knocked out of her. Paul looked between them. Well? Aren't you going to say hello? Everly snapped out of it. Yes, of course. Come in, come in. Let me show you the living room. I'll make some tea. The woman who once mocked my curtains was now frantically fluffing her own pillows like a nervous Airbnb host. Tiffany rushed to the kitchen, mumbling about the good china. They ushered us in like visiting royalty. No comments about microwave lasagna this time. Everly returned with lemon scones and loose-leaf tea, pouring carefully as if her hands were fragile glass. So, she said with a strained smile, what brings you all here today? My father sat tall, one ankle resting neatly over his knee. Jasmine thought it was time we reconnected, my father said evenly. We haven't had a proper introduction since the wedding. Tiffany, however, wasn't listening to him. She couldn't take her eyes off Simon. So, she asked, smiling too sweetly, you work with your dad? Simon nodded. I'm our international accounts lead. I manage negotiations with European and East Asian clients. I'm overseas about half the year. Wow, Tiffany breathed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. That's really impressive. Are you single? My father raised a brow. Simon gave a polite smile. Married. Her smile flickered, but only for a heartbeat. Well, you know, sometimes people end up with the wrong person. Simon blinked. Sorry. She shrugged, tone dripping with sugar. Just saying, some couples aren't a good match. Looks, ambition, taste, compatibility. It happens. My hands tightened in my lap. She wasn't even pretending to hide the jab. My mom beside me gave my arm a gentle squeeze, but stayed quiet. Simon tilted his head. Are you talking about my wife? I just think you could do better, Tiffany said, syrupy as honey. No offense. Simon studied her for a long moment, then smiled. But it wasn't the friendly kind. You think I could do better than a multilingual Rhodes Scholar who was recruited by Oxford Pharmaceuticals for their biotech division? Tiffany's eyes widened. Simon's voice stayed calm but firm. Her father runs a fund managing over 600 million in assets. She's brilliant, kind, and leagues above me. But somehow she chose me. He let that linger sharp as glass. So if you think you're the better match, Tiffany, you may want to recalibrate your metrics. The blood drained from her face. Everly dropped her spoon with a soft clatter. The silence pressed in, suffocating. Paul leaned against the doorway, watching. He didn't say a word. Everly finally tried to recover, her voice trembling. Well, we didn't mean to misjudge anything. My father spoke then, steady and deliberate. We don't flaunt wealth. That's not how we were raised. But respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat people when you think they have none. Neither Everly nor Tiffany replied. Nigel still hadn't spoken since our arrival, just stared at the carpet, unmoving, as though it might swallow him whole. That I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their faces said enough. That we finished our tea in brittle silence. Just before leaving, Tiffany made one last, desperate attempt. Simon, she said, smoothing her blouse. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime? Simon didn't even blink. My wife would laugh herself unconscious. Tiffany's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Everly sat rigid beside her, the cheerful hostess mask dissolving. Her hand hovered above her teacup, but she never touched it. Nigel remained frozen at the far end of the couch, eyes still glued to the rug. Simon stood near the window, looking through the sheer curtains at the Bentley outside. Calm, collected, like a man who just dismantled a foolish business pitch with logic and composure, which in a way he had. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. My mother shifted slightly, smoothing her skirt, poised but neutral. My father sat back with the steady patience of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. Finally, Everly spoke, voice faint. We didn't know Jasmine's family was. She trailed off, realizing no ending to that sentence would save her. Simon turned, raising a brow. Wealthy? Educated? Successful? Human? Tiffany cleared her throat. That's not what she looked like when we first met her. You mean, my mother said softly, she wasn't wearing a label you recognized. That's not the same as having no worth. My father leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. We've never flaunted what we have. Not because we're ashamed of it, because it isn't what defines us. Everly blinked rapidly. We assumed. You assumed wrong, my father said calmly. And you treated our daughter accordingly. Tiffany recoiled as though struck. Paul sat in the corner, hands clasped, watching without interruption. He hadn't spoken much since the confrontation began, and I realized he was giving us the space we'd been denied for so long. My father's voice cut through the stillness. You mocked her. You humiliated her. You walked into her home and made her feel like a stranger in it. All because you decided she wasn't good enough for you. Everly's voice cracked. We were only trying to guide her, to help her fit in. She never needed to fit into anything, my mother snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard her. She isn't clay for you to shape. She isn't a project. She is your son's wife. Tiffany sank into the couch cushions, her voice small now. I didn't mean for it to be that serious. Simon gave a short, incredulous laugh. You threatened to erase her socially and financially. That sounded serious to me. Everly opened her mouth again, but Nigel spoke first, his gravelly voice startling the room into stillness. I told Paul, he said slowly, that she was unusual for our family. I told him she was rare. He lifted his eyes to me. And I didn't mean poor. I meant she was the first one in years who didn't look at us like we were special. And that made us nervous. For the first time, there was honesty in his tone. My father rose to his feet. We didn't come here for apologies, he said plainly. We came here to close the loop. Jasmine deserved to be seen for who she is, not who you decided she must be. Everly scrambled up too, her hands trembling. I see her now, she said desperately. I swear, I see it now. My mother and I rose together. Simon was already by the door, holding it open. My father gave Everly a single nod, but said nothing more. We left in silence, the kind that lingers after a storm, heavy and cleansing outside. Simon opened the car door for my mother. My father waited until she was seated before stepping in himself. I was the last to enter the Bentley. As I did, I glanced back. Paul stood in the doorway watching us go. His face was unreadable, but his eyes locked on mine. Slowly, he stepped down the path until he was beside the car just as Simon started the engine. "I'll ride back separately," he murmured. "I'll see you at home." I nodded. He leaned closer. "Are you okay?" "I will be." He hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you for not blowing up, even when you had every reason to." I didn't reply. That night, Paul and I sat together in our living room. No TV, no distractions, just quiet. "I should have stepped in sooner," he said at last. "You tried," I told him, "but I needed to take space, and I needed them to see it for themselves." He nodded. Days passed quietly. Then an email from Everly appeared in my inbox. Subject line, "Thank you." The message was short. "I was wrong about everything. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm sorry." Everly. I didn't respond. Later that week, Tiffany sent a text. "Do you think we could start over? Maybe coffee?" I showed Paul. He shook his head. "That's your choice." But I wouldn't. I didn't. From that day on, Everly and Tiffany never came by uninvited again. The comments about my clothes, my cooking, my background, gone. If they spoke to me at all, it was through cautious emails or awkward holiday cards. Paul still visited sometimes, out of duty more than affection. He told me they were different now. Humble, quieter, even strangely curious about me. "They ask about you," he said one night. "Not to criticize, just to know." I wasn't sure I believed it, but I realized I didn't need to. I had peace, and that was enough. It's strange how people only learn to respect boundaries once they've been forced to crash into them. They saw only a girl in plain shoes, living in a modest apartment with a man they thought deserved better. They never looked deeper. They mistook wealth for wisdom, silence for weakness. But in the end, it wasn't the Bentley that shifted everything. It was the silence that followed. The silence of humiliation. The silence of realization. The silence of people finally hearing how loud their arrogance had been. I didn't need revenge. I only needed them to hear the sound of their own pride breaking.